Welcome to the Life Curation Podcast. I'm your host, Andrina Tisi. Together, we will explore thoughts, inspirations, and conversations that feed our soul, spark the mind, and nourish the body. Thank you so much for being here to learn and grow, and for walking this journey called life with me. Dears, we are back with another episode. And yes, you are right. My voice is a little off, but I do sound better than I sounded yesterday, and tomorrow will be even better. So I don't want to prolong this episode release even further. I wanted to release it last week, but it was not possible because of my health, but it's possible now. So today I have a topic for you I've been wanting to bring onto the show for a while, and I'm super excited I found Laura to come chat with me and introduce the internal family system to us. Also IFS, so internal family system. You may have heard of it as it has gained in popularity over the last few years or so. And IFS comes from the idea that the human mind is made up of different quote-unquote parts, each with their own unique characteristics, beliefs, and emotions. And Laura is a IFS coach and supports people to design their unique path that allows for a sustained sense of intentionality, love that word, well-being and flourishing. And Laura likes to dance with questions, and we'll learn in the conversation what question she's dancing with at the moment. She loves to allow curiosity to guide her exploration, and in line with the IFS philosophy, she believes that we all contain multitudes. Currently, she plays at the intersection of somatic, technology, and spirituality. At Google, she manages a leadership development program focused on self-organized and cooperative learning. Personally, she advocates for gender equality in business at the Australian Women's Chamber of Commerce, was a TEDx speaker and a writer. And she will take us in to the whole bits of internal family system. And I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get inspired. I hope it may give you a little bit of self-understanding. And yeah, let's go. Thanks for being here. Well, thank you, Laura, for being here. And we were just talking about how we're enjoying spring. So we can continue because now we're on air.
Yes, I was just raving about the beautiful day and the sun and the blossoming of everything everywhere here in Zurich. Really beautiful.
It is beautiful. And it's so, obviously, there is the equinox and this beginning of spring. And then I was like, well, it's so interesting that it really is happening. I'm like, well, obviously it's happening, right? Nature is unfolding, and I think it's such a nice, I love spring. I really do love spring.
Yeah, me too.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking your time, and I'm very, very excited about our topic today. Personally, very interested and curious to learn more, and very excited to share with the audience.
Thank you for having me. I also love the topic, so I think
that's
it's going to be a juicy conversation.
Yeah. Before we dive into it, I'm always really curious how people start their day. And, we all have, I think, our routines. Sometimes we do more, sometimes we do less in the morning. So I'm just curious how you started today in the morning.
Well, today with the sun, it was a beautiful start, I have to say. And I did a practice that I don't do daily, but sometimes I do, and I really notice the difference, which is journaling on my gratitude journal. So specifically today, I did it outside. There's this beautiful park quite close to where I live, 3-minute walk. And I took my coffee that I made at home and this book and my pen, my favorite pen, and I just journaled under the sun, not so strong because it was in the morning, but it was still really light and, with the trees, and that's how I started today.
That is a beautiful start. Thanks for sharing. And besides that practice you did this morning and also the spring, is there anything at the moment currently that is lighting you up?
Yeah, I think it's a bit aligned. I started this practice inspired by a book that I was reading and by some practices that a friend of mine taught me, which is relating to trees or connecting to a specific tree and really taking time to develop a relationship to it and go there daily. And sometimes I meditate there, sometimes I just connect to it in a different way. And it's really interesting to see how this tree is particularly standing out from others. And I don't know, I'm just very, very excited about how we can deepen our relationship to other beings that are not only humans, right? I think it's a beautiful practice, and I'm excited about the potential of that.
That is a beautiful practice. Do you have the book on top of your mind? If not, it's okay. Then maybe you can send it to me later on.
No, yes, it is World as Lover, World as Self by Joanna Macy, who is this amazing, you know her? Yes, I know. Buddhist scholar and systems thinking person, and just created a lot of work around deep ecology, and I just think everything she proposes is so powerful, and this particular practice is so simple and yet so transformational.
I have the book on my it's actually in my island home. I don't have it here, but the book about hope from her, and I've not read it yet, but it's on my nightstand on the island.
Maybe it's calling,
Maybe it is, yeah. Coincidence or not, right? Okay, well, again, super excited about the topic of internal family system. And, some people may know already a little bit something about it. Some people may know absolutely nothing about it. Maybe they've, it's a little bit more out there than I think it's than already last year or so. How would you describe it to somebody in very simple terms who has never heard anything about it?
Yeah. So, I think it's interesting to know a bit about how the system was created, because I think it also explains the basic principles, and the name itself reveals a bit, right? So yes. Richard Schwartz created, he was originally a very renowned family therapist, which, I don't know how much, family therapies work with systems of people, so with families, external families. And he had some success with this practice, was trying to prove the validity of it. And then he realized that the systems, so external systems, also existed inside of one specific person. So that we ourselves as individuals have systems inside of us. And this doesn't have to be parent figures or traditional systems. They have other nomenclatures that I can explain afterwards.
Yes.
But the basic idea is that we all hold different parts within ourselves, so that we all have systems and are multitudes, and those are the parts, and that's the fundament.
Cool, thank you. And we'll go into the parts. So I do want to backtrack. I think it's interesting that you mentioned the internal and the external, and I think is it Because I know I'm also familiar with constellation work, family constellation work, right? So can somebody kind of say like, okay, that's kind of my external system, right? Whether it's like what you said, in terms of the family system, and now we kind of with internal family system, we look at what's actually happening within myself and the different quote unquote family parts, or yeah. You mentioned it's not necessarily parents or, yeah.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily work with constellations,
Yes.
as in externalizing them.
Yes.
But yes, we can see the model as a system. Simply, I mean, to put it in simple terms, also if we were talking to like a child or someone,
Yes.
it's like a team or an orchestra.
Okay,
right?
cool.
So
yeah.
let's imagine, I don't know, we're planning for a concert, and then of course we have like all these different instruments that are playing. We have, I don't know, the strings, the brass, the woodwind, the, I don't know, percussion, maybe a choir, and everyone has different roles.
Yes.
And if everyone works together harmoniously and, shares the rhythm and is connected, then we have an amazing performance. And sometimes, because we're humans, that doesn't happen. Like people get impatient, or we miss a beat, or we actually wish we were in the choir, but we are on the flute. And there are tensions then that happen. And the idea of IFS is that, internal family systems,
Yes.
we talk about IFS, is that we have those like orchestras within ourselves. And sometimes it's harmonious and every part cooperates, and sometimes it's not. And then we can bring curiosity to see how we can harmonize and understand better what these parts want and need.
I love that. It's such a good image, right? And I think that also makes it then playful in a way. And what you mentioned is in terms of curiosity, I think that's such a big an important aspect if we go into therapy or just even personal growth, right? Not make it so heavy and like, oh, it's work and if we go in with, I mean, in somatic experiencing, curiosity is such a big part of it, because we come from the point where if there is curiosity, there is less fear, or even almost no fear, right? So I really love that. So let's go into the parts, the different players in a way. So if you can maybe, I don't know if there is a set of players or parts, and just take us on a little journey in there.
Amazing. Yeah, so I love that you zoomed in into curiosity, because indeed that's one of the main elements of one of the parts, that is the self. So I would say there are 4 basic categories of parts in the framework, even though then we all have our individual, ways of expressing those parts. But
yes,
in large, there are like 4 categories, and they are the self, then we have the exiles, and then we have 2 types of protectors, which are managers and firefighters. And maybe to start with the self,
yes,
this is exactly where curiosity is key. The self is our qualities, sets of qualities that we all have. So we don't have to learn them, we don't have to acquire them, we all are basically born with them, and they are like 8 C's, and it's curiosity, it's compassion, clarity, creativity, calm, confidence, courage, and connectedness. So, all these beautiful qualities that are there. And this is who we are according to the motto. We are all of these things. And then there are parts in our systems. So we can start maybe with the exiles, which are the youngest parts in our system. These are parts that might have been hurt in the past, or are vulnerable in a way. So this can be parts that carry a bit of shame, or like vulnerabilities, pain, loneliness, it's just sensitive, vulnerable young parts. And then there are these 2 types of protectors that try to protect this exiles, right? The younger parts. Okay. And they do it. Does it make sense?
Yes, absolutely. It's great. Yeah, makes sense.
So I'll continue with the protectors who try to protect the younger parts. And they do it however they can, like to the best of their ability. And managers usually do it by controlling. And sometimes they sound like authority figures in our life, like, I don't know, parents or teachers, or, you know, these voices that were important to us when we were young. And they can be, I don't know, the inner critic, for example, is a well-known manager. There are also others like pleasers or planners, or just parts that try to control the situation and the outcome, right?
Okay.
And then we have the firefighters, which have a similar goal, but they do it differently. So they try to protect us by distracting or numbing or running away, right? And this might be procrastination or, overeating or exercising, dissociating, leaving, behaviors like that, that are different from controlling, but try to, again, protect us from the system. And those, I would say, are the 4 key parts of the model.
Excellent. I have a million questions. Okay, so the exile, is that similar, in other, I guess, language, would it be almost like the inner child?
Yes,
yeah,
it could be. Yeah, another model that's language.
Yeah.
Language. The only thing is that we might have multiple inner children, and actually it's quite frequent.
Yes. I mean, I'm on and off reading this book, and in there they also talk about the different parts of the inner child, or different kinds of inner children, where one is like, the wounded and the hurt child, and the other one is more the rebel, where it goes like into like, like right? So that's similar, which is super interesting. And then, so the protector then control the exiles. And how would we? I mean, you had some examples which are great, but I could imagine sometimes it's not even so easy to know, well, is this now the firefighter, or is this the manager, and which part is it actually protecting, or what is it trying to protect? So how would it, I guess if you work with a client, how are you figuring out what is at play right now? I guess that's my question.
Mm-hmm. So I would say, actually, sometimes it's not so important to exactly figure out who is doing what and like what is specifically it's protecting for the client, especially. Like, that is my role maybe as a therapist, to keep all the parts on track, and to actually make sure that, well, many parts come up. I want just to give a sense of how a usual session goes. It's not like we have one and another. Sometimes there are 10 parts that want our attention, and that's normal. Like, we have many parts. And so I think it's more useful for the client, for the person experiencing IFS, to really to focus on one part, or like the relationship between maybe 2 parts or maximum 3 parts, and really give space to that, and to gain understanding of also like the somatic experience of that, instead of really like cognitively discerning why and when and how this emerged, right? So I think this is a difference to other models. Sometimes clients don't even, like, I don't need to know the personal story of a client in order to guide them through the process, and I think that's powerful.
It is powerful, and I like that, because that's with even with EFT tapping, or also somatic experiencing, we just go with what is right now, right? And then from there we go into that exploration. So it sounds pretty similar.
Yeah, and then also, just to add something that I didn't mention before, we ask the parts, right? That's a key part of the work. Like, the client asks the parts, like, who they are, what they do, what their wishes are, what their fears are, what they want to do if they don't do what they do, what they're afraid of, So this is how we find out what the parts are, just by asking them directly.
So a lot of self-inquiry.
Totally, yeah.
And then that's where the curiosity comes in again. And I think then, if I just ask the questions, then it's self-inquiry and self-knowledge. That's super, super, super interesting. And what have you experienced? Like, for example, I could imagine that, you working with like 2 parts you mentioned before, right? And you just explore that. I could imagine, and I would be curious what you think, that then other things that maybe were not even part of the conversation or the exploration change as well, because everything is influenced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can you repeat? I'm not sure I'm fully understanding.
If you really explore like 2 parts with somebody, and you said we have many different parts, and but you're really exploring 2 parts with somebody, and then by exploring that, other things with the other parts that you're not even exploring in that situation are shifting as well, or healing, or transforming.
Yes, I indeed. I mean, the system is always listening, right? And even though in theory or the vision might be to work with 2 parts, the reality is that very frequently other parts will jump in that are, I don't know, activated by what's happening between these 2 parts. And so a key part of the work also as a therapist or as a guide is to ask these parts to give us a bit of space. That's the language we use, so that we can really be with the parts that are working. But of course, I mean, the theory is that we are a system, and every change we make, right, in 1 part and 2 parts will affect and impact the entire system. And sometimes behaviors or feelings are so interconnected that we are surprised that we work on something that we think has nothing to do with another thing, and then suddenly everything shifts.
It's like a ripple effect. It's beautiful. Is there like certain topics or situations that IFS works better with than something else? And if so, can you give some examples on how that would look?
Yeah, I mean, I would say IFS, I mean, there's evidence proving that, it works with many of the traditional therapeutic, mental health issues that people might have, so like anxiety, depression, etc. So, but also things like, self-doubt, relationship problems, fear, shame, procrastination, perfectionism, like all these topics that I think many of us experience to one extent or another. IFS really works for that. And like specific examples that I can give is maybe with procrastination, it's interesting to notice that sometimes there are parts that are really like ambitious and driven and want us to get to, reach a specific goal by a specific time. And then there are other parts that are, overwhelmed or just exhausted and then lead us to, not do the things that we wanted to do. And that can frequently lead to confusion, because it's like, wait, I really thought I wanted to do it. Why am I not doing it? And then we add additional pressure. And with this framework, for example, with IFS, we can really get a better understanding of, okay, I am a system. There are many different parts within me. And even though I sometimes think I am only this, I am also all the other things. And how can I do what I want to do in a way that respects and hears, the entire ecosystem? That would be something that I think people can relate to.
Love it. So in German we have this sowohl als auch, right? It's both and. It's not one or the other, right? I love the example of procrastination, and I would love to dive deeper into a little bit right on that example. So let's say somebody comes with a topic of like, well, I'm not writing this book, but I really want to write this book, and I'm really ambitious and I have it laid out, but somehow I'm always like finding other things to do than sitting down and writing. how could they like start to explore, and this is of course just an example, but I think many people could replace the quote-unquote book topic with something else, right? Maybe it's even working out, it's going out into the fresh air, some kind of work project or whatever it is, right? So even if in self-exploration, and of course, working with somebody, I think it's of course very helpful. But if somebody just wants to explore a little bit, how could they do that?
If they have had I would recommend everyone to start like with a guided session so that you get a sense of what it might feel like.
Okay.
But if you've had that, probably, my way of starting is tuning in with the body, because frequently these parts also have a somatic way of expressing themselves. So in this moment, you check in with yourself and you notice, and this is an example, but that you have some pressure on your chest when you notice that you haven't started this book. And then you bring curiosity to that, and you're like, okay, I noticed this pressure in my chest. Like, is this a part maybe? Okay, what is it saying? Does it have a voice? Is it saying something? And then we can imagine it says something. It says like, you're not doing it again. And you bring curiosity. And then, I don't know, these parts really start to speak to us, and we start developing a relationship to them. And there's so much wisdom. Sometimes we really are surprised by what the parts are saying to us. Because we might really not be aware, right? Or we haven't given space to really listen to what the desire, the fear, the underlying motive is for this part to be there. And then frequently when we start focusing on the part, it's what I was explaining before, like the entire system gets activated, and then it's a party, really. So many parts come up, and then we can, try to not overwhelm the system, because sometimes, so many parts come up that it's hard to even listen to, making sense of what's happening. But then moving slowly and understanding the relationships between the different parts, and making sure that we just give space to these parts and understand just with curiosity and compassion, like what they're wanting to do. And very frequently this highlights a shift that we could implement in our life towards this goal that would make the achieving of the goal more sustainable, or just more aligned to what the entire ecosystem wants. That's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and it brings me back to that image of the orchestra, right? Like, what does the flute player need? But then also taking very serious what that part of the orchestra or that instrument of the orchestra needs, because I think a lot of times we then come into it of like, we don't want it, we want it away, and we want it like not to like be procrastinators, we want to be go-getters. But if we take it seriously, I think then that part probably can also then relax.
Exactly. Yeah. When we listen to it, right, it can definitely start relaxing, because it doesn't have to get our attention in desperate ways anymore, because it feels like it can be heard.
I also had to think of, and maybe it's because of the procrastination example, of the upper limit phenomenon, right? Like I don't know, everything is great, and then suddenly we get sick or whatever it is, right? So I think that could also be very interesting in terms of, well, which part, or what is maybe trying to protect me, or which part is holding me back, and explore there, right?
And holding me back, this language sometimes carries a bit of judgment, right? It's like, oh, this part should not hold me back. But frequently it's like, oh, there is a reason, a very valid reason of why this part is doing what it's doing, even though right now I cannot understand it, and it feels like it's trying to sabotage me. But like, really, there is a good reason of why this part is doing this way. And if we can understand that, then I think many things start to shift.
Yeah, it brings softness into the whole aspect of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I did read about, and I loved it, so I do want to read it. The grounding assumption is that there are no bad parts, only parts forced into bad roles.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's basically, well, yeah, I mean, this is the fundamental idea, or one of the ideas, right? That parts just want to help us in the best way they know. And sometimes these ways are, well, no longer needed, or we, or parts of us might think they are, harmful or not good for us. But the reality is the intention is good. They just want to help us in whatever way they can. And we can understand more if we dedicate time to listen to this part and really get like why it's behaving the way it is. And maybe it is because it's like still frozen in a past in which that behavior was needed, which is no longer needed in the now. Or maybe it is afraid of what would happen if it stops doing this thing, right? But it doesn't. It's not anchored in the now, and updating the reality of this part is a key part of the model too. So we can all, the system can be harmonized.
Mm-hmm. And then by just quote unquote exploring and asking these questions, and really hearing the different parts, that's pretty much where the healing and the understanding then happens.
Yes, part of it. And then there's also the process that, the language is unburdening.
Yes.
In the model. And the idea is that indeed there are no bad parts, but sometimes they carry burdens. So this is like, shame or fear or, beliefs that, come from a real situation in the past, or sometimes a reaction to something that has happened. And these parts can release them, and that's the process of unburdening. And it really looks like, well, doing what I mentioned before, so focusing on the part, understanding this part by asking questions. So like, what are you doing? What is your fear? What are you carrying? Also, like, are you carrying a burden? And frequently, like, the parts itself, like they know what is there, and they might tell us like a specific situation that happened, or they might tell us more about the burden. Sometimes it doesn't have to happen, but they usually know what they need, and if they are ready, these parts sometimes are willing to release this burden. But it's important for me to say that this is not like the goal of the model, right? Like it's not it's important that this is an exploration, and it's not like, a successful session is one in which there's an unburdening. That doesn't have to be. Okay. But sometimes there are unburdenings, and then these parts let go of this role and let go of this burden. This can be very creative, like done quite creatively. It can be, we visualize the part, like letting go of a burden, or we put them on the beach, or in a forest where they just dance or play. Like, it can be a visualization of something, or just a sensation in the body that something is shifting, or some words that happen. It's very individual how the unburdening actually looks like, but the parts can let go of burdens and of roles, and that's also a key part of the healing of the model.
I'm always absolutely fascinated how and I'm mentioning it because I could imagine it's similar, how just providing the space, and of course the safe space, and what you mentioned before, hearing and listening and giving it space, how something can shift. And I see that in somatic experiencing, me being on the for example client side, right? Like, I feel like, well, we didn't do anything, but I feel so much better. And of course we did something, because the space and the safety and the tuning in and the noticing was able to be here, right? And there something can shift. So I think from the sound of it, it's very similar, that it's just like a very soft process, and just exploring, and just, it's not like fireworks and but letting it also has to do with the nervous system, like letting that happen, and then the parts finding their space and peace in a way, right?
Exactly. And this is a fascination of mine. I'm also training right now in neurosomatic trauma integration.
Oh,
And I mean,
cool.
as you're saying, yeah, I'm loving it. And what you're saying is that giving space is healing in itself. And what I understand also now more is that, well, trauma was a lack of time. Like we didn't
Yes,
have time to process what was happening. And
exactly.
so it's healing to give time and space and to be able to follow our own rhythm. And trauma, which, by the way, trauma is not only like, really intense shock trauma. It can also be, and it's very frequently like developmental trauma, things to do with our relationships. And yeah, it can look in many, many, many different ways. So I feel like it's important to also maybe take away a bit of this heaviness that the term trauma seems to carry. But yeah, trauma is actually integrated with cathartic experiences that are super intense and just remind us of the actual trauma, but very frequently with this softness and this pendulation of like activating and going back to what actually happened, but also regulating and bringing it back to the now and in a gentle way and with awareness and remaining present, because catharsis feels great and it releases a lot of hormones and it can be even addictive in a way, right? It's like super high energy, but in the long run, I think integration is what actually makes a difference and where sustainable change can happen. So yeah, totally love
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I think catharsis can also be a way of numbing, right? It can also be a way of like, well, let me go and skydive. I don't know. So I get the rush of. I don't have anything against skydiving, if people want to do that, but I think it's if it's that rush of of getting a kick, right? It can be if somebody has that may be something to like look at, like what is really there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and why am I doing it? What's my motivation? It can be many things. It can be amazing. In itself, it doesn't. There's no judgment at all. But understanding really the underlying motivation is interesting in a way.
Yeah, super super cool. Do you have a personal, and however personal you want to share, up to you, story with IFS?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, first, I think it just brought a lot of like more ease into my system, as in I'm able to hold paradoxes, which, by the way, is a concept I love, and I just think they're beautiful, and I think we are paradoxical creatures always, and I love that this model accounts for that. Like, yes, we are multitudes, and we are paradoxical, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. And I think I am able to hold those paradoxes within myself with way more lightness and compassion and just acceptance, and that gives a softness and a space again into many different situations. And I mean, a theme for me is definitely this polarization. That's how we call it, like when two parts want different things at the same time, but they're part of the same system. I have it a lot with different things, but also with like creativity and saying yes to many things, starting all these different trainings and projects and teams. And you're laughing, so maybe you know this. At the
Yes.
same time, yeah. So sometimes I'm like completely overscheduled, and then there's this part of me that is like, hey, we just want to rest,
Yeah.
and focus on this one thing and go deeper into this one thing and not have a million things. And yeah, I notice I'm still working with that topic for sure, but there's instead of being frustrated and going into stories like, oh, why am I doing this again and never, these voices, I'm like, oh, okay, this part, it seems that maybe now I'm giving too much attention or space to this part that is filling my calendar with 50 million things. Maybe it's time to listen to this other part. How is my system doing? So it just gives me a way of dealing with the small and the big things in life with more ease and compassion, and yeah, gives me a sense of peace, I would say.
like you said, I was laughing because I completely resonate. For me at the moment, it's like I want to be at the same time here in Zurich and on the island, on the Canary Island, right? And then I'm like I feel like this like pull into both directions, right? And it's also interesting, like of course I had to also think of human design and numerology and because they all have, like for example for me I have a lot of two, so that means also like I have these two parts in a way, right? More than two, but like then again that's why what you also said in terms of like polarity and just being okay with, it doesn't have to be just one thing, it can be like two things or even more, right? And being okay with that, and I think that can then bring a lot of I'm gonna say inner peace, without making it too, but just like being okay with maybe the different pulls we have within ourselves, right?
Exactly. And even finding beauty in it somehow, right? Like it's sometimes for me even it goes beyond acceptance, and it's like, oh wow, this is my complex inner landscape. How beautiful.
How beautiful, yeah. And that's what a reframe, what an amazing reframing, right? Like coming from like fighting and struggling and like, no, I don't want this part right now, or this sensation or whatever it is. Being like, oh yeah, that's cool. I'm so so I have so many different facets within me, right? And yes, good, right? Yeah. In your, and I love that, so I do want to ask you this. In your bio, you mentioned that you love dancing with questions. Is there a question for you that you're dancing with right now? Like in your life or in...
A question that has been coming back right now, like frequently, is what is alive in the moment right now? I feel like this is such a powerful guide for me at the moment. Like instead of, following some plan or idea that I had laid out for me, like checking in with what is alive here right now. And then I'm noticing that by following that, I end up in, beautiful adventures that I had not even considered before. And it's a beautiful guide.
What a beautiful way to kind of wrap up. And I think that's a really beautiful question for everybody to kind of ponder over and go towards the aliveness, right? And that's then, I'm sure it's not a C, but I could imagine the self is also alive.
It is.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on or that you feel like you wanted to just share before we close?
This model, we could go in so many different directions. It's so expansive, so I'm sure there's a lot of things that we could have explored, but I feel quite complete with our journey today.
Okay, we can always do a second part 2. Okay, my dear, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and enjoy the spring day.
You too. So, I'm curious, did you get a sense of yourself? Did you get a sense of maybe your exile and your protectors? And could you even sense maybe where there is a manager and where there is a firefighter? I really liked kind of the going into dialogue with the different parts and to get wisdom and understanding and answers from within ourselves, right? Because I do believe, and many of you know that already through my work, is that, the answers are within us. And by sometimes going into almost like a dialogue with, in this topic parts, we can find insights and learn more about ourselves. And like I said in the intro, that self-discovery. So we'll link all the things in the show notes as usual. So if you're curious, go and check it out. And if you have questions for Laura or for myself, of course, reach out. And if you've not already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and to hit those 4 stars, or actually 5 stars, sorry. It really helps. The podcast, it helps my guests and of course myself, and to bring the message of life creation, personal growth, and inquiry and life as it is out into the world. Thanks for being here.